So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Supporting International Students Dealing with Isolation and Loneliness During Self-Isolation. And this is good for our supporting international students, but also all of us practitioners helping our international students. And so my name is Melissa Tupin-Laforge, and I'm the Manager of Professional Development here at CBIE, and I'll be facilitating the technical aspects of the webinar today. So please note, on that note, that the webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent to you in the automatic follow-up email, which you will receive later today. So today we gather in this special place to continue our learning journey together. We take a moment to recognize that this presentation is being held on the traditional and unceded territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishwaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge and pay tribute to all Aboriginal peoples who live either in the Greater Toronto Area or elsewhere in Canada and worldwide. We honor their courageous leaders of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So for those of you, a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into it, especially for those of you who might be new to this webinar platform, there's a couple features that I'd like to point out. And so please locate the microphone as well as the hand on your control panel. You should see them. And if you don't see your control panel, please let me know and I'll assist you as soon as I'm done this introduction. And so you're automatically muted because we have currently 300 and counting people registering that are joining us on this webinar. So for the sake of not having background noise, everyone is muted. And if you'd like to speak up and ask a question, by all means, just raise your hand. And so just that being said, if you could raise your hand so that I can see that you found that function. Great, I see a bunch of hands going up right now. So just keep in mind that I need to scroll through about 400 people with their hands up. So I'll do my best to keep an eye on that and to try and give everyone a chance to speak up and to partake. And we encourage everyone to do that. But of course, with 400 people, it might be a little bit tricky to get to everyone's questions. And so what we'll do is we'll be collating all of your questions. So by all means, type in your questions to the question box if we don't get to you. And that document will be reviewed by our presenter, and we'll be answering all of your questions and uploading that onto the Google Drive. And so I've already sent out a link on the chat. Maybe I'll put all your hands down. And if you see the message in the chat box, raise your hand again so I know that you're seeing it. Okay, I've got 1, 2, I've got a few of you. Okay, so just locate the chat option on your control panel, expand it, and you'll be able to see the chat. So there we go, we have a few more people. Again, if you can't see that, just let me know in the chat and I will, I'll respond to you as soon as possible. And so this link will allow you to download all of the handouts as well as from the Google Drive. And so there's the handouts, and the message I'm getting here, we only see the question box. So just check in your question box to see if you can see this information. Actually, let me copy paste it again. Copy, and I'll send it to you right now. Paste, and I'll send it to everyone, entire audience, and send. There you go. So you should see the link there. If not, I'll send it to you privately. So participation, so please raise your hand if you want to ask your questions. And again, use the question box to type in anything directly to me. And if you don't have a microphone and you would like to ask a question, I can read it out loud to the group and to the presenter. So as I mentioned, if you have any technical assistance, just let me know and I will get to you as soon as I possibly can after this introduction. So let me introduce our presenter today. And so, and the webinar, of course. So this webinar will discuss strategies on supporting ourselves and our students who are feeling lonely from lack of social interaction during this time of COVID-19 and the fact that we are asked to be self-isolated, and most of us are working from home and in this new reality. And so our presenter is Christina Furtado, and she's a mental health counselor in the areas of addiction, anger management, behavioral intervention, self-esteem, mood-related disorders, and anxiety and trauma-related disorders. She has over 20 years of experience within the educational sector, and most recently with Keep Me Safe by Guard Me as a mental health and wellness specialist. Christina is a practicing member of the Canadian Psychological Association and the Ontario Association of Mental Health Professionals since 2015, and she continues to be involved in various mental health initiatives across Canada. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Christina.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I welcome you into my home, and I do thank you for allowing me into yours. And today we are looking at really means of supporting our international students that have really been significantly impacted during the COVID-19 disruption. And though we also need to appreciate that we've all had our own experiences with the change in our routine, the change in our structures, and even really expectations that we had as to how our day-to-day was going to be like, have been impacted in some way to where we're sort of left trying to figure it out and really trying to navigate our way around. So we're going to be diving into a very common experience that we are finding not only our international students identifying with, but even ourselves, and that's with loneliness. And it's during this time where, you know, being socially connected to others is something that we as humans are hardwired to desire and is a fundamental need that we have. So social structures are founded upon social interactions. By interacting with one another, we tend to design certain rules, certain behaviors, certain institutions, as well as systems in which we live. So whether you yourself are feeling alone or are alone and experiencing increased levels of anxiety, stress, and depression from not having that human contact that we have become so accustomed to needing and desiring, this is a very normal experience. And my hope is during the course of our time together, not only is to provide you with information of better understanding of why we are all experiencing this, but more importantly, the steps that need to happen in order for us to feel a little bit more connected and recalibrate ourselves to the new norm. And if we can do that within our own lives, within our own sort of environments, then we actually can do the same for our international students. So it's sort of a stepping stone into us taking care of ourselves in order to better take care of them. So first and foremost, I think there's an appreciation that we need to have with regards to the purpose and the uniqueness of culture and what that means. And we, you know, without socialization, we could not have our society and our culture. And without social interaction, we could not have socialization. So there really is this domino effect and really intricate relationship between our social interaction and our need for social connection to some of our cultural beliefs and cultural foundations and how we sort of navigate through that. So when we're trying to understand how we can best support our international students, we always sort of take the perspective of, okay, what culture are they from? What is their upbringing? But in order to really understand what their perspective is right now during pandemic, during that self-isolation, it's really just to understand overall culture. When we do focus too much on the differences amongst the various cultures, we can actually be, there's a risk to that. So when we do take it to the basics level of understanding, it allows us to sort of set the framework and a new framework in order to best support our students and ourselves. So the primary focus with regards to culture is really the creation of one's identity. our family and cultural backgrounds shape our attitudes around not only mental health, but overall well-being. We're taught as a result of family and cultural background how to cope with problems and how to deal with various difficult situations. And this is a prime example of one of those situations that are challenging our mental well-being, that is challenging some of our traditions and even our rituals with regards to family interactions or even that socialization in which we'll talk about. It is our family and cultural background that also sort of teaches us and guides us how to talk about those various challenges and really who we talk about and who we seek out for support. It's our culture as well that really shapes how we relax, the various practices of self-care, and how to resolve conflict. So it influences quite a bit of who we have become with regards to our own personal identities. So it leads the introduction into really how the various functions of socialization sort of provides, and social issues are really fundamentally related to cultural dimensions. And it's at the core of that we learn how to communicate with others, that we look at socialization and our international students coming to Canada for different reasons. One, not only for educational purposes, obviously as their primary, but also to fulfill two of those primary roles of just socialization. And that is learning the culture of the society. Canadian culture, Western culture is very different than some of the cultural foundations of some of our international students, which tend to focus more on the family unit, the community unit, and focusing on the good of the broader community, which is, oddly enough, something that from the perspective of COVID, we are trying to really educate people as to the benefits behind physical distancing. It's for the global good in curbing the spread. So it really highlights that we've been sort of forced to take a step back and really look at how we view social interaction, how we view socialization in the way that we've been accustomed to, and now in the way that we have to sort of move forward from. Socialization is also sort of a key aspect and an important function of education. And not only is it through the socialization that we interact with other individuals or larger groups or even social institutions such as schools, but it really does sort of trigger various different emotional experiences. And again, depending on what that experience is, will dictate not only our perception of that particular experience, but also, more importantly, what our role is going to be during that particular interaction. So what I'd like to sort of look at is, we'll go into this poll. And, earlier I introduced the concept of culture as being the primary focus in creating a person's identity. And when we are able to sort of reflect on our own self as to, okay, well, how do I best describe myself? We can actually have a different perspective and a more empathetic and compassionate perspective in everyone is different. So everyone's going to be handling this situation differently, depending on the impact, depending on their emotions, but more importantly, depending on who they are as an individual prior to COVID. So this particular poll will look at different aspects of how you would describe yourself. So in this case, thank you. Poll is open. How would you identify and how would you describe yourself? Please select one, from 1 being an introvert to 5 being extrovert.
So for those of you that are just typing into the question box your number, please go ahead and click it right on your screen so it can be calculated into the poll. Okay, so at this point, out of 488 people, we have 84% that have voted. And so I'll close the poll now and we'll show the results. Christina, can you see the results on your screen or would you like me to read them out loud?
I can see them, but So we've got, actually, no, it's pretty small. If you don't mind reading it, it will help me out. Sure.
Sure thing. Yeah. So introverts, very introverted, 4%. And then, out of scale of a 1 to 5, 5 being really extroverted. And so in the middle, a 2, we've got 23%. 3 is 45%, kind of in the middle between introvert and extrovert. And then 23% again on the more extroverted side, and only 6% on the very extroverted.
Excellent. That's actually quite interesting. So we'll sort of discuss that after we go through a few of the other questions, but that's good to know. So here I'm opening up another poll with regards to how you would best describe yourself, with regards to 1, being shy, to 5, being very outgoing.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a few seconds for people to vote. The numbers are going up very quickly. We're at 60% already.
Okay.
And just for those of you who logged in a little bit later, I'm getting a lot of the same question here. So the recording, if you're registered in this webinar, you will automatically receive the link to the recording and to the link to the Google Drive. And so you can share this widely with your students and your colleagues, okay? So this will be sent to you before the end of today. All right, so I'll close that poll. We've got 83% of people who have voted, and we'll share the results. So 1% is very, very shy. Then on the second to that is 15%. And then in the middle, 39% between shy and outgoing. We've got 37% who are a 4 and 8% who are saying that they're very outgoing.
Okay, wow. Okay, next one. Or not.
And the next one here, we're going to ask you, how lonely are you? Not at all, sometimes, or very much. So just a few seconds to get you guys, get your vote in. Okay, so that's great. We've got, again, I got 80. Oh, that's funny. I've got some people asking really interesting questions, Christina. Is this now or usually, or now or pre-COVID? So that's actually really interesting questions that people are asking.
It is.
Yeah.
So the intention of what, sorry.
Go for it.
The intention of what we're trying to capture here is pre-COVID, because we want to really, again, get a snapshot and a clear indicator of how do we really describe ourselves? What do we identify with regards to our interaction, our socialization comfortability pre-COVID?
Okay, great.
So these
So
questions
we've got
are
almost
all with regards to
90% here, people who've voted. So I'll share those results. And so how lonely are you? Not at all, 30%, sometimes 62%, and very much 8%.
Okay. So there is some rhythm to my madness here with asking these particular questions. So when we talked about culture and we talked about how our family and cultural background do contribute to our personal identity. So this is not only how we are as individuals solely, but also more importantly, how we interact with others. So we can see that amongst the 3 poles, that middle ground sort of dictates a comfortability level that we've all can identify with, or a high number of us can identify with. So that middle with regards to, yep, I kind of have an introvert, but I'm also an extrovert. And then with regards to being shy or outgoing, which are very different meanings to introverts and extroverts. And then now with regards to feeling lonely, 62% identified with pre-COVID experiences and feelings of loneliness. So when we are seeing all of these questions, and these are questions that we can really ask our students as well in group discussions, in just brief check-ins to see how they're doing, it's asking those questions in the same way. How would you describe yourself before this particular situation? And then I would actually go as far as to ask those same questions again with regards to now. When we look at sort of the impact that of this disruption, and I do call it a disruption. Some individuals can call it a disaster, some can call it a crisis. I look at it as disruption to what has been familiar to us, what we've been comfortable with, and sort of what we have been accustomed to knowing. And the result has been disruption. Our school has been, transitioned to remote. We've all been, encouraged to isolate. So that's very different. So when disasters occur, people's daily lives and normal routines are disrupted. That is what happens. And when those disruptions happen without any preparation and often without any warning, we tend to become very concerned with the norm that we've been accustomed to versus looking at the opportunities that these particular disruptions or what has happened has actually presented itself. And that's not to say that, it's not normal to be concerned with all the various impacts, because again, we've all identified ourselves to already know a good sense of who we are prior to COVID. So we can better have an idea of how we're going to respond to disruptions, but we have to be mindful and pay attention to them. So there are specific beliefs around how we relate to other people during particular pandemics and disasters, and how we actually do confront and cope with those fears. At the same time, we are programmed to seek out support from groups, large groups. It's a matter of survival. It is our survival mechanism, is to, go into large groups and, sort of collaborate and look at providing, for lack of a better way, a game plan. But when we are identifying individuals that are experiencing significant degrees of loneliness and feeling isolated themselves without having that connection from other individuals, it will really speak to those people that, identify themselves pre-COVID as experiencing times of loneliness at a high percentage. It is going to be those individuals that identify themselves with being more shy than outgoing. So those students of yours, if you're able to sort of take a step back and have that type of relationship with your students to where you can sort of picture them in your mind now, those students that exhibited those similar way of being and interacting, so more shy, more reserved, those are going to be the students that we do want to keep our eyes on, and maybe even go the step further of reaching out to see how they're doing. It is also our beliefs, and that is again inherited by not only family and cultural backgrounds, as to our obligations to people and our responsibilities to others, influencing our own well-being. So we find ourselves in again, a very difficult position as a result of this disruption, where we have two of our worlds, in essence, our professional world as well as our personal world, colliding without any preparation and without any warning. And yet in both of those worlds, we have very different obligations and very different expectations that are put on us by others, but more importantly, what we put on to ourselves. Our international students are exactly the same way. They have had two different worlds collide. They've had, the expectations and responsibilities that they have to their families back home. They have the expectations and responsibilities that they have to the school and their education and their overall experience while they're here in Canada. And this disruption has significantly impacted those expectations. So it really opens up the experience to various emotions as a result of this particular disruption. I've already mentioned that, it does happen often without warning. And when people do face unexpected and unfamiliar problems, what ends up happening is we are very quick to react. We want to come up with a plan right away, and we're very prompt in coming up with an action of defense. However, this can also have adverse effects on how we're feeling because of some of the unprecedented limitations and restrictions to our ability to be reactive during this particular time has really triggered some of those negative and more overwhelming emotions. So when we interact with others during particular disasters, we look to those other individuals as a means of stimulating some change in how we're thinking about the situation. We look to others and, sort of certain emotions that they're showing us as to how I can better manage the situation. It's really about modeling various different types of perspectives through that emotional connection. And we've become so accustomed, and our international students have become so accustomed, again, due to cultural backgrounds, that we look towards our social interactions as a means of providing us that modeled behavior or modeled emotions. Due to isolation right now, we've lost that ability of face-to-face that we have relied on sort of inherently and without any thought. We just sort of took it for granted that our social interaction can only happen face-to-face. And what we find right now is that we are all starting to become more creative in learning that while, yes, face-to-face and in-person, hands-on human contact has its own benefits and is valuable, we can achieve a very similar intention to social interaction remotely. So that can lessen the increase of individuals experiencing anxiety, experiencing stress, and more importantly, not feeling so alone and so lonely. So we find ourselves right now in a situation where, it is difficult adjusting to the new normal. And that can quite often and does trigger a feeling of isolation or loneliness. We find ourselves in this moment where social distancing and remote social interaction has become the new normal. And while the intention of it is purely for protecting the safety and health of all of our global community members, we don't necessarily focus on that. We focus on the negative impacts. And again, that is very much a human-driven thought process because that is what we've always done to survive. Our existence as humans have been relied upon our instincts of flagging on danger and being prepared to protect and sort of execute various actions of not making the situation worse. So our new normal right now, I see it as a time for resiliency and perseverance. We're faced with the need to recalibrate and identify new ways of interacting. We need to provide a platform not only for ourselves to achieve that, but we do need a platform for our international students to also achieve that. Whether it be putting together, small different social groups through the institutions, through organizations, or even taking that upon yourself, depending on what role you do have within various schools or within that international student education world. Do those different support groups, get to know how students are doing by providing them the platform to interact, to provide them the platform to see that they are not actually alone. While they may feel alone, they're not. So we need to provide them an alternative to view the perspective and actually start generating more positive and forward thinking that will only benefit them in better managing their emotions and will allow us to better manage ours. So one of the points that I have here as well is social distancing doesn't mean we have to stop our social connections. When we talk about socialization and how culture views that, there's a lot of different practices, there's a lot of different rituals, and it is just through that practice that really there's an underlining meaning, and it's about building those connections to where you are solidifying and strengthening the support network. Taiwan does or had tea rituals as a means of just showing respect and trying to build a foundation of support amongst those individuals. So it's not that practice is lost, and nor should it be viewed as lost. It's a matter of now we need to reevaluate how we proceed forward given some of those restrictions that we've been placed upon ourselves with isolation. So rather than dreading the new reality with social distancing, it is an opportunity, as I see it, to be creative about connecting. And it's about reconnecting in a way that can actually set our Canadian population, our international students, even our own institutions ahead of everybody else. we are all in this together, and it's a time that together we can improvise, together we can adapt, and with that we can overcome. Now, we've all felt lonely from time to time, and 62% of you identify with, feeling lonely sometimes, even prior to the COVID situations. And feelings of loneliness are very personal. So everyone's experience with it is very different. So for some people, certain life events may mean that they feel lonely. And that could be, going through a breakup. It could be even, starting college or university for our international students, for example, had already been an experience potentially of loneliness for them. Moving to a new area or a new country without any friends or a community network, when you've been so accustomed to relying on that social interaction, that human contact, as a means of support, as a means of socialization. So while loneliness is a very universal experience, and regardless of what the cultural background is, regardless of how old we are, it is subject to the one individual, that individual. And we're not mind readers by any means, and we can't sit there and spend 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours exploring with our students, or even frankly exploring with ourselves or family members as to the why behind the experience. It's just the appreciation that we're going to experience loneliness. We're going to experience the COVID-19 situation and disruption very uniquely to us. Now, it is also very important to identify that there's a difference between loneliness and actually feeling alone. So one common description of loneliness that I think is really important to highlight is that it's the feeling that we get when our need for rewarding social contact and relationships is not met. So, but loneliness is not the same. So what that really means is that the loneliness, we have a certain expectation with regards to our social interactions, with regards to, again, the needs that we've established with regards to our educational path, our roles within the institutions, our roles with our students, our roles with our families. All of this is based on a foundation of expectations that we've set or that has been set as a precedent based on previous experience. So if we think about pre-COVID, there's been various dynamics of relationships, there's various interactions that we've had that we've been accustomed to throughout that circumstance. COVID-19 has disrupted that normal. So the loneliness that we're actually experiencing, or the loneliness that the international students may be experiencing at this time, is that it's an unmet need to those expectations that they had with regards to the social interaction or socialization experience. So we need to, not only for ourselves in dealing with the loneliness, but also help our students identify and listen to our bodies, because our bodies do act as a signal. We're all at risk for loneliness, and feeling lonely is our body's signal that we need to connect. And it's not about human contact connection. It's about social connection. And that's, again, a very different perspective that we've all had. We've all been accustomed to, technological mediums that have, been around for a while, Facebook, Instagram, and we've sort of utilized them more in the background. And we are now in a situation where social media and various other technological formats are our primary means of maintaining that social connection that we all strive for. We just have to, again, look for the opportunities that have presented themselves, look at those various experiences that can actually be adapted from our old normal to this now remote type of socialization. We can look at our feelings of loneliness as, our natural alarm system. It's designed to sort of, again, trigger an integral part of an opportunity that's been missed. And we look at, fear as that particular emotion as a means of protection, as a means of looking to, looking to somebody else to help us out. Whereas loneliness, we tend to sort of become more introverted of that experience and not want to share that we're not feeling that connection. Loneliness is the condition of feeling alone, feeling disconnected and feeling potentially that no one cares, or as if no one is really part of their social or familiar network. So in speaking to some international students, during some of the webinars that I've already hosted specifically for them, that is definitely something that is more of the underlining tone to how they are experiencing this particular disruption. What are they taking on upon themselves? If they had to, rush back to go home, then there is aspects of expectations that they had to sort of manage and navigate with regards to dealing with family members. Or if they're stranded here, looking at, again, well, now I'm not near my family. Now I don't have that social connection of some of my peers that I've been so accustomed to interacting with on a day-to-day basis at campus or during school time, depending on how old they are. When that particular element that they've been familiar with has been removed, that feeling of loneliness sort of clutters their ability to think clearly, if you will. It really generates more negative spiraling type of thought processes and not necessarily a rational way of approaching and problem solving, and really becoming more strategic, if you will, and creative of how can I still maintain that social and even familiar community that I that I had before, that I was looking forward to continuing, and now how do I do that? Fostering strong connections is one of the critical elements in really combating that feeling and that condition of loneliness. So when we do already have healthy established relationships that have that collaboration, that unique bond, if you will, it does have an impact on how quickly we fall into that condition of loneliness. And while we were all sort of hoping that this social isolation was going to be resolved by now, we are faced with, again, a new reality, and that this is going to be quite longer than we probably all anticipated. While it's for the greater good, it's hard for us to see that. And it really boils down to, again, that perspective that we have, and that perspective that we can actually model and teach our students to also take on upon themselves, to lessen that stress level, to lessen the anxiety, and really also make them part of what they're ultimately striving for, and that is connection and social support. Now, this screen here, I wanted to really capture because, again, it's really identifying what are the stages of loneliness. And while we've all been in self-isolation for, I don't know, 2 weeks or so, I myself have been in isolation for a lot longer than that because I was traveling. So I have not had human contact for several weeks now. So I can totally identify with regards to the various stages of loneliness. And though it made me really think and sort of take a step back in identifying, the stages of loneliness are very similar to that of the stages of grief. And if we really look at it from the perspective of that, it allows us to be a little bit more self-compassionate if we are experiencing different emotions that we frankly never have before, or to the intensity that we've had before. But it also makes us a little bit more compassionate and empathetic to our student body and how they may be experiencing it. So some demands that they might be putting on you, or even how they are reacting to you with regards to, I want this answer now, what are you going to do for me, how are you going to support me, and all of these type of demands, then this sort of puts it into a different perspective as to, again, the various experiences that people have and how that might impact them. So before I go into that, I'm going to just address some of the questions that we might have.
Thank you, Christina. Sorry, just a
No,
few
that's
really
okay.
interesting questions that have come in. So it's all
Hmm.
relevant to supporting our students. So
Yes.
maybe I can let Candice, she's got an interesting question. Candice, let me just find your name here so that I can unmute you. Candice, it's kind of a tricky one here. There's so many people here. It's like, wow, oh, I can't see you, Candice. Okay, sorry, I can't find her name in the
Okay.
list here. So I'll just ask her question so that
Okay.
she can have. So she's got a lot of international students who are not eligible for the government funding, right? So
Mhm.
EI and that emergency fund. And so she's looking for some specific advice relevant to students who are having, experiencing extreme financial hardship. So if there's any tips that you can provide her, that she would appreciate that.
So the financial distress tips are a bit different than obviously the experience of loneliness. And though it is um, similar to the stress management, right? So really we know that the activating situation that's causing the stress is finances and not necessarily having the financial means that they were anticipating or that they were expecting. So now they are forced to be sort of look at a different course of action as to how to be creative about that. So what I always suggest ahead of time is to ensure that there is clarity around their perspective of the situation. Now, we can all be quite reactive as a result of feelings that we have and those thoughts that create those various feelings. But it's in this time in managing whatever stress that we have and do it in a way that is more rational and less emotionally driven. So we want to be responsive. So the first and foremost is identifying, okay, I don't have the financial means. So what does this actually mean? What is the impact? And identifying all of the various worries that are triggered as a result of that particular stressor. And then once we've identified those, what we want to then do is sort of put the worries in a hierarchy of more probable of an outcome versus not so probable. So what's more immediate and sort of what is not something that is going to necessarily be an impact due to finances in the near future. And then it's having them work through an action plan of possible solutions to lessen the chance of that worry or lessen the actual impact of that possible perception. Now, while they do not necessarily have access to some of the financial support that has been offered, there can be other government opportunities that they have depending on their student status through Service Canada. So there are different opportunities there, and I'm more than happy to share them post this presentation and sort of dive into that. Now, Keep Me Safe will be hosting a webinar at the end of the month on financial distress, which will really be talking about those various opportunities and various course of actions to take.
Great, thank you so much. Kim, okay, there we go. A lot of institutions, I've just looked through the grapevine with working at CBIE, a lot of institutions are either providing direct financial assistance relevant to, funds that they have available. I know that's not an opportunity for every institution, but other institutions are doing fundraising for their
Yeah.
students. And so anyways, there's another
It,
question here. Sorry.
mm-hmm. No, that's okay.
So
Go
I'll
ahead.
just unmute Kim. So I've asked Kim to ask her question. So I found her in the list. So Kim, go ahead when you're ready. Your mic is being unmuted right now.
Hi, Kim.
There we go.
Hi. Hi, Kim.
Okay. So maybe Kim is okay.
Kim is managing something else.
Aren't we all?
Exactly. Right.
Okay. So I'll just mute Kim and I'll ask her question. Okay.
Okay.
So here we are. So interesting. interestingly, we are dealing with different challenges in mass. If we have a mass of about 700 students that are still in residence, mostly
Yep.
international students, and our international students are not, in capital letters, adhering to social distancing. We have tried face to face. With distance, of course, to explain the concept. They've put up posters, they've sent out emails, they've done web check-ins, sanctioned through the conduct system. So there's sanctions as well. It's just everything is not working. So they're constantly gathering in very large
Mhm.
groups, sharing cigarettes and drinks. And so, from an international student perspective, any advice on reaching out to these students to help them understand the severity and the importance of this?
Yeah. So again, depending on what the cultural background is of those students, if they tend to be amongst the same sort of cultural background, it is something that is just part of their experience, and that is their family, right? And one thing that we need to be aware of is, again, their perspective of the of who their peers are to them during this particular time. So I would actually probably suggest approaching this in a similar way that I would advocate for parents when their kids are just not adhering to certain rules. And it's about collaboration. It's about understanding the why behind what they're actually doing, and why they feel that they need to continue to interact in that way. We also need to understand that in certain cases they don't see the grave danger to the spread of the virus, whereas other individuals do, and are adhering to those recommendations. So I would really strongly encourage a more collaborative approach with them as to managing those expectations, really being very clear as to what your expectations from an institutional perspective is for their behavior, but also with regards to their perspectives. While we don't necessarily have to agree with it, it's their reality, right? Perception is an individual's reality, becomes their truth. And the only way to counter that, or provide people with an alternative to see a different perspective, is to base it on facts and not opinions. So right now, with you coming forward by saying do this, do this, do this, they're looking at it as the institution's way of just dictating and not looking at the facts, and why it's important to do what they are being asked to do. So it's taking it from the standpoint of education, collaboration, having them together. And while that is sort of going against physical distancing as well, it is the starting point of having that conversation with them, and providing them handouts not from the institution, but providing them handouts from either Public Health Agencies of Canada or the WHO, or even, frankly, from their country of origin. There's a lot of documentation out there now. There's a lot of information that we have to be mindful of are not always factual. So we really want to stick to the trustworthy sources. And the WHO, being one of that, again, that world organization, does have data, does have all the information that is factual from the various countries around the world that have been impacted by COVID. They need to hear this because it's about their overall community. And if they're from a more collective type of society where family and community is what really drives an individual and not their own goals type of thing, then that's another way of getting them on board. But there has to be that middle ground with regards to establishing what your expectations are and what theirs are, and recalibrating that.
Great, thank Christina. Do you want to keep going? And then it's up to you. We still have a few more comments and questions, but I'll leave it up to you in terms of your timing. What would you prefer?
I'm fine with answering a few more.
Okay, great. If anyone wants to take the mic, please just raise your hand and I will sort through and I can give you the mic. But in the meantime, let me see if I've got anyone now. No, okay, I can filter, so no one's up. So here we are. We have a comment here from Kylie. We recently called our students K to 12 to see how they're doing. We were pleasantly surprised to see that so many of our high school students were cheerful and in good spirits, and that this is really not hitting them. So, would you say that students could be in a state of denial, or are they just interpreting the situation differently due to their age, or perhaps they're just more adaptable than adults in some
Well,
way and have already reached acceptance?
it's quite possible that it's all of the above. And it really speaks to actually, not oddly enough, but the screen that I have up right now, with regards to the stages of loneliness to the stages of grief. And I've already highlighted that our ability to manage day-to-day stressors is going to be different. It's going to be different depending on our own personal experiences, our own perception of the experience. And our perception is dictated by not only our upbringing, but information, lack of information, personal values, and a bunch of other different variables. And that's why everyone's experience itself and how we respond to various experiences, while the same experience, is going to be unique to us. So when we look at grief, grief is the normal internal feeling that we experience in reaction to a loss. Loneliness is grief turned inward when we experience part of ourselves dying from being alone. So there are the same exact stages as I've determined, as I've put out here, that we go through with regards to the stages of grief. Now, these are not stages in the sense of, oh, you go through denial, then you go to anger, then you go to bargaining, and so forth. You can actually sort of move through the different stages at different times and sort of go in and out. So it is quite possible that some of those students that you've checked in with have been able to have the support connection that they actually needed. So you might need more social connection, or another student might need more social connection, whereas those particular students, nope, I've got what I need. It's meeting my needs in the way that it's been presented to me. Yep, I speak to my family, or I can speak to my friends, whatever schedule, routine, whatever dynamic they have with their host families. So it could possibly just be that their experience, while disrupted with regards to remote learning, with disruptions with regards to not being able to go back home, they've adapted to, and they've really allowed themselves to sort of put their knees in, put their heels in to a new life here, that have that social connection, that social support already established in a way that does fulfill their needs. So they don't have time, nor do they have a triggering event that is actually raising that sense of loneliness or unhappiness or even sadness. So can that be acceptance? Yes, of course. And it's also adaptability. So one of the keys, though, to feeling happy, is with regards to strong connections to other people. So while the lack of these bonds even are temporary at this time for some, if they have a strong bond or strong connection already established in their social support network, whether it be, in-house or from a distance and remotely, they're going to be happy, because loneliness's major factor is unhappiness. And that's what we're going to see. And it's the most important area to tackle when we're trying to make ourselves happy, is that strong connection.
Okay, great. One last comment here. That's there. People are hosting conversations, so it's Niam is asking. We're hosting group conversation. Is it healthy to have these conversations about loneliness collectively, or can that just spiral the group or throw people off?
So the one thing that we have to sort of be mindful of is that emotions are, or can be, contagious, in the sense of unconsciously we mirror particular emotions and behaviors, and our peers or whomever else is around us can pick them up if they are already, we'll say, at risk, in the sense of if they're already having those experiences on a lower level and haven't necessarily identified it, then it could potentially just sort of trigger that experience to a more intense level than what they are prepared to deal with. That's not to say do not have the conversations. I think it's important to have the conversations to normalize the potential of them feeling this way. You know, when we are dealing with international students specifically, the one thing I've introduced earlier on, that our cultural background sort of dictates and not dictates, teaches us how to cope with challenges, not only on our own, but more importantly, who do we talk to? How do we talk about it? And really our comfortability with identifying those various emotions that situations do trigger. So because of that, some students aren't necessarily comfortable with sharing, I feel lonely, I feel upset, I feel sad, I'm really missing home, because it may appear that they're not being strong. It may appear that they don't necessarily have, a strong character. Again, based on their cultural backgrounds, that is still something that is inheritedly passed on. And while it's not necessarily a common belief amongst the younger generation in the K to 12, we're seeing a little bit more openness amongst that demographic to mental wellness and sort of talking about feelings. There are still going to be those students with that uncomfortability. By having discussions openly, but not necessarily enforcing that all students share, that's the key. If they are in the group, it is about having an open and welcoming conversation for those that want to participate, and not making it mandatory, because it's that particular mandate, if you will, or enforcement that can be very off-putting, and it can actually close a student up from actually sharing their experiences.
Great, Christina, thank you. Here we have a few other, two people here asking about what are some specific events or activities that we can organize to involve international students, or where can we find them? Do you have any resources?
Yeah, actually, there are a few lists that I've sort of included on a few slides down with regards to creative ways of staying connected and socializing remotely. And I think that those particular ideas, a lot of them can actually be adapted and introduced from a school perspective, providing for their students. So we can definitely look at that in a few slides.
Okay, well, I guess this is a good leeway, and maybe we'll keep the other questions for a little bit later.
Sounds good. So that sort of segues into, while we talked about different coping mechanisms and how we all deal with various situations differently, while it could be the same situation, the same event, our perspective of it is going to be unique to us, because our thoughts are unique to us, our feelings are unique to us, and how we choose to either react or respond is, again, our unique sort of automatic pilot of those ABCs of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So self-awareness of what our coping strategies are prior to COVID is also going to help us sort of evaluate the effectiveness of those coping mechanisms post-COVID. Because again, unprecedented experience, unprecedented event that has disrupted our lives with no warning and no preparation. So some of our coping mechanisms, while we've relied on them before with our normal life stressors, may not necessarily be either as effective right now, or we need to sort of readjust and sort of build a more robust coping mechanisms toolkit than what we do have now. So I'd like to open up the poll to see sort of how individuals in the room, what are the following coping mechanisms or methods can you identify with pre-COVID-19?
Okay, great. So the poll has been launched. So we'll give a few seconds for people to vote. And just while we're waiting, someone asked a really interesting question in terms of surveying students
Yeah.
and getting some responses. And so one said, is it possible that students who choose to respond are doing relatively well, whereas students who are having a really hard time might not have responded? So it's a good point to take into consideration.
It definitely is. And I think that part of that, again, also speaks to how those surveys are presented. When we are presenting a particular survey, when trying to identify or get the sense of how your students are emotionally dealing with various situations, depending on their cultural background, to ask in such a public forum is not going to get you the results that you're looking for. Whereas if you address it in a more private means, so email surveys, survey monkeys, things of that nature, where they don't have to necessarily identify themselves as an individual responding to the survey, but more of collecting information overall as to how your student population is doing, you'll get better results and you'll get a more open and honest poll.
Thank you. Yeah, and there's another comment too, just to, kind of a reminder, especially in these times relevant to intercultural, competencies, just the fact that, checking in with our own self in terms of,
Yep.
being very mindful of not blaming other groups, not doing things that we've asked them to, because we don't necessarily know what they're experiencing and what they're going through, especially from a different cultural context. And so that was
Well,
another comment that came through.
I think it's definitely a fair comment, but also to take it to the next level, it is just even outside of the cultural competency. We don't know what we don't know with any individual that we come in contact with, whether they be an international student or whether they are not. We are all very unique in, again, our perspective of the situation, and we can't judge, we can't be angry, nor can we, say that they're right and we're wrong, because perception is reality for the individual and reality becomes their truth. So it's really important that, part of what we're hoping to achieve is not only can you have a perspective of your own well-being during this particular disruption, how you would cope with it. It's not about having a platform or a framework or a mold to then say to your students, well, this is what works for me, so here you go, because that's not going to be beneficial. But it's about teaching us a more empathetic pathway to understanding that everyone has experienced this to different degrees, to different intensities, and it's about providing a more supportive network of social interaction that can allow your students to feel connected, because it is the connection that is really what we are all as humans striving for and desiring right now. And we're trying to lessen people feeling lonely and really provide them the opportunity to still feel connected even from a remote situation.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Great. So I'll close the poll here. We have 80% of people who voted out of 462. So here we
Okay.
go. We'll share the results. And so 35% said prayer or spirituality or meditation. I know we balked a few, some that people might have very
Yeah.
different altogether. So 35%. Seeking social support or communal activities, there's 54%. Getting active is the winner with 65%, or the most popular, I should say. And practicing acceptance is up there at 47%. And avoidance or just being strong is at 28%.
Okay. So the reason that I sort of asked this particular question of the group is because it really highlights all the various and more common coping sort of categories, if you will, regardless of what cultural background you're from. So if we can sort of, again, look at when we are, talking to our students and providing them choice of options to connect, choice of options to engage in various coping strategies, we can provide them those options when we know what those options can be. And that's simply what it, again, was an activity to really capture that we all will deal with various situations in our own way. And we have to look at ultimately putting our well-being as priority in order to get ourselves sort of taken care of and situated in a more positive way, that we are better equipped to take care and support someone else. Now, there's been some discussion and some questions with regards to stress, financial stress. And, one of those aspects of loneliness is about, not having that support system, not having, people understand where they're coming from, that has contributed to them feeling lonely. And that highlights, again, the difference between being alone and the feeling of loneliness. So the 4 A's to taking charge of stress can actually be something that is valuable to look at when we are talking to students about the disruption, when we are talking about, the various impacts, and not necessarily focusing on the emotional response that they have, but more importantly, how they are actually viewing and taking on the stress of the experience itself. So the 4 A's, I'm not going to talk at great length about them. They're definitely here for you to see. They will be in the PDF slides for you. But when we look at those 4 A's, we can also see that one of those A's is still one of those concepts with regards to the stages of loneliness and the stages of grief, and that is the practice of acceptance. And the practice of acceptance is, I'll be honest, a skill in itself, and it takes time, but it's really of how you view the situation and how you ultimately want to sort of move forward from it. So sometimes we really have no choice but to just accept things as the way that they are. We want to supply ourselves with those tools, those strategies, so we can deal with it. And we want to we want to work towards changing our perception of that situation. Sometimes that involves talking with someone. Sometimes that involves, practicing positive self-talk, which, can easily change that automatic pilot that I spoke of earlier with regards to those feelings that are created because of specific thoughts. We can also take the time through acceptance in order to learn from mistakes. So even from, a perspective of your role in how you work with your students and how you want to support your international students, the COVID-19 disruption has really provided us an opportunity to pause and recalibrate and rethink and provide us an opportunity for growth as to how do we want to reestablish our relationships? How do we want to, even redefine who we are in relation to our family members, but more importantly, in our relation to our jobs and our responsibilities of our jobs. So there could be things that you might want to change with regards to your role and how you've interacted with your students. It's that opportunity of acceptance and just moving on. Now, it does take, again, that shift of perspective. We are hardwired, as I've mentioned before, as humans, that has sort of been the essence of our survival, to be aware of those dangers, to be on the lookout for them so we can take precautions, so we can take action and protect ourselves and protect our loved ones. And looking for the negative in this particular situation of disruption that we find ourselves in is also a very normal response. And what we want to try to do now that we've all had our transition slowly into working from home and sort of having that remote opportunity, we now can look at flipping the script. Let's trick the mind into looking at this perspective, this situation from a more positive approach of opportunities versus barriers and obstacles. So I've introduced you to the idea and the understanding that perception is reality. It does become one's truth, and that truth can be self-limiting. It sort of provides us that tunnel vision, if you will, and we can't see how something can work out in a different way. So to sort of introduce that perspective shift and try to flip the script a little bit, we can, one, describe the situation. So this is, again, capturing all the important factual details about the event that is causing, some worry or causing the loneliness or even causing some stress. Then once we're able to sort of lay that foundation out with regards to factual information, we're going to craft what our current perspective of the situation is. So again, it's based on that individual's perspective and not how we see it through their eyes, or how they should be seeing it, or how we assume that they're seeing it. Then we sort of look at opening up, and this could be where other people get involved or maybe not. And you can do this as sort of a different small group event if you have students that are experiencing similar perspectives and similar things. Develop 3 or 5 alternatives. So what are different perspectives? How can we look at the same situation through a different pair of glasses? And ultimately what we want to try to do is make that perspective a bit more positive, maybe 3 to 4 levels if you can, positive, and choose one of those alternatives to sort of dictate and sort of use over the next week. The idea here is we all have the power to change our situations. We can't change the circumstance, but we can change our view of it. So that may involve some, setting new expectations, and it can be a very difficult thing to, expect something to happen, and if you think it's going to happen, and that's not the case. We do have a tendency as humans to pin our hopes and happiness on fulfilled expectations, and when those expectations are not met, then that triggers intense stress levels, and intense anxiety, and potentially even transitioning into more of those intense emotional situations like loneliness or even depression. So when we're setting the new expectations, what we're trying to do is establish, a new reality and our new normal, because we cannot continue in the same way that we've done pre-COVID to post-COVID. It's just not realistic, nor is it going to be beneficial if we keep within that mindset. So it will take recalibration of expectations, again, not only of our own, but those of others that we interact with or that have an interaction with us. Do not expect a similar performance. And when we're talking to those students that may not necessarily see or be following those rules as we spoke about earlier in one of those questions, we can't expect a similar performance. So if you are approaching the situation in the same way that you approached other school rules being broken, this is a new situation. It is a new event that people are reacting to. So we cannot proceed in the same way, nor can we expect them to react in the same way. So we need to, and they need to understand the why, providing, others with the context and justification for expectations will actually increase their accountability for meeting those expectations if they are part of that and they understand the why. We need to help individuals understand the bigger picture, and then you will gain their support. Now, we are dealing with a variety of different cultural backgrounds, different ages, and again, different experiences. And I've sort of highlighted in the beginning that, it comes with its own risks when we focus too much on those differences. And what we're dealing with is, we're all experiencing that need, that desire, and seeking connection in isolation, because it's talking about loneliness, and it's talking about not having that human contact that we have been so accustomed to having and needing in order to go through our day. So what I was able to do, over this time, there has definitely been an impact of the coronavirus across the world. We're no stranger to that. We've seen it on the news, and it has definitely altered human rituals and even behaviors that have evolved over time. So it's been interesting to see how some of those cultures have adapted and sort of recalibrated some of those traditions, or even what they've introduced into their daily practices as a means of staying connected, just in a more remote type of way. So for example, we've all been accustomed to shaking hands and greeting as part of a tradition in just showing sign of trust, or just even a common way of, respect. So we've stopped doing that. So conventions like that are sort of now something that we are moving away from out of fear of transmitting the virus. So we've all picked up other actual cultural habits as a means of showing the same intention, which is, some of us have bowed down, some of us have done the fist pump, and it's about, taking this opportunity to develop new cultural habits, new tricks, and new cues to get by, because that is ultimately what connection provides us. When it's face-to-face human contact, it's exactly those particular elements that we can still maintain, still learn from, even from a remote distance. So in Australia, they had the isolation happy hour. So there was individuals within the small community that would tend to gather at the local pub, or even gather amongst each other in the neighborhood to have these drinks. And what they've done is they have, across this area in Australia, which is quite large, and it's sort of spread in other areas of Australia, isolation happy hour. And it's the same day of the week at the same time across all these various different communities in Australia. And you go out on your balconies, you go out into your backyards, and your neighbors are doing the same, and you actually have your drinks. So while there's that physical distance, it's actually a means of still maintaining that same tradition in a different way. We've all seen videos of individuals in Italy singing and serenading each other from their windows, and that was an amazing scene to see. And there was a quote actually that was going around Italy, and that it was circulating and saying, we're apart now to be closer together later. And that's very powerful, because it really speaks to, again, our need to understand that this is temporary. And while there's going to be changes to come, and changes as a result of this, our distancing of that human contact is temporary. Iran had dance challenges that a lot of their doctors and nurses were doing, and actually, putting them live stream, as well as, quarantine serenades, as they called it. China introduced a new reality show called the Home Karaoke Station that people can log into and actually share what they want the songs to be that those famous people are actually singing on the show. So it just really highlights again that, while what we've been familiar with is no longer what our norm is, it doesn't mean that we have to stay static in a state of fear, a state of panic, or uncomfortability. So how do we deal with loneliness? So this is really going into some of those strategies and some of those tips. And, feelings don't last forever. Feelings can be changed by ourselves or with the support from someone else. So when we're talking about supporting our international students, it's really a matter of looking at what our role is in helping them. And part of our role is what we model. So realize that loneliness is just a feeling. The feeling was triggered by a thought or a memory. And particular thought is like, okay, no one else is going to share this experience. When in fact, we've all been disrupted. We just don't necessarily have the appreciation of how intense of an impact it's had for various people. Usually this thought or feeling represents a fear that we have. And those fears are labeled as a threat in our mind. And that's sort of where our feelings do tend to take over. And what we want to achieve here, and what we hope to also model for our students, is that we can control our thoughts and not have our thoughts control us. So how do we manage loneliness? So if you are experiencing extreme loneliness and social isolation during this time of isolation, remember that loneliness is a condition that you can change. It's a condition that our students can change. Tomorrow is a new day, and time heals all wounds. It isn't easy and it isn't quick, but with the right help and shifts in perspective and some persistence, we can actually get where we want to be, and the rewards will actually be quite exciting. We all strive as humans for creativity and change. While it's uncomfortable at first, it can be an actual motivator. So how to manage feelings of loneliness? First and foremost is about finding out the why. So why are they feeling lonely? Why are you feeling lonely? Loneliness is not the same as being alone. It is dealing with the loneliness that really can change that feeling. Look at when you're feeling lonely. So is there a particular time of day? So given the disruption, given the changes of schedule and routine, we might be experiencing times or feeling of loneliness at particular times where previously it was fulfilled with that human contact or a various activity that we no longer are able to do given the isolation. So try to keep as much of a schedule and sort of fill in your time, especially during those moments or during that particular period of time where you can identify feeling the most lonely. Really try to remind yourself that, feeling lonely is temporary. Try to do something that's meaningful. Reach out and encourage others to reach out for support. Become more active. So that really speaks to that large large number of you that identified with being active and staying active as a coping mechanism, because it really triggers not only your mental health, but it triggers your physical health, which is our overall health well-being. So when we can actually engage both of those aspects, we are at our most healthiest form. Find sources of comfort, create something. So look at either an art project, even look at how can you be creative in your jobs or be creative in your roles. Try to look at different ways of, getting and reaching out to students or even reaching out to colleagues, things of that nature. And plan. This isn't a time to sort of sit back and not have a plan for the future, not to have, steps of, okay, well, what am I going to do tomorrow? Or what am I going to do the next day? Always have a plan, and it should include the future. Not as we are in now, but more importantly as to what it is that you want it to be. Now, I was asked about the various aspects with regards to different ways of engaging students, and that is coming up in the next few slides. But really what we are trying to sort of establish right now is, again, the importance of remote socialization, because it is that socialization that encourages social interaction, and that is ultimately what we are all seeking and what we are all needing right now is that social interaction. It's not necessarily, while human contact again, has its benefits, and we do desire that because we don't have that ability right now. We can and we should be seeking out those opportunities for socialization and social interaction in a remote way. So make it a priority to keep in touch with family and friends. Encourage that as well of your students. Social distancing does come with its own risks. We know this. We've experienced it. We as humans are that social creatures. We are hardwired, as I said, to seek and need that connection. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we rely on that connection to be given to us through human contact in face-to-face. It can be done remotely, and we just need to shift our perspective, shift our mindset, and really turn our attention into those ways of being creative. So, when we're trying to support those students that want connections with their families back home, if they are still here, using voice notes through their text messaging instead of actual texting out, so they can hear their family members versus just reading words on a page. There is quarantine chat that's been introduced, which is through the dial-up voice chat app, which allows people, again, strictly to communicate with family members via more voice chat versus the actual language keyboard chat. Social media, as I've said, it has been really valuable during this time to stay connected not only with friends and family, but also a larger community. And then ways of creatively sort of staying socially connected remotely. So throwing book clubs, throwing film festivals. These are ways that you can also engage your students in participating. So throw a movie night, that all your international students are invited to. The Netflix party is a great platform right now that's been introduced by Netflix, where you log in and it's sort of a guest invite to other participants, and there's a chat log, and you can talk about the movie, and you can sort of share different perspectives of that experience as if you were watching it together. The difference being, obviously, you are chatting it out versus talking it out. There's other ways, again, of sort of looking at technology as our friend right now in providing us opportunities to be socially connected remotely. We've been sort of accustomed to Facebook and WhatsApp, And though there are so many different platforms now that are available to us and have actually been quite proactive in providing students specifically a more either reduced rate or free access to the platform in order for them to connect with family members. Do virtual concerts. But another way of really highlighting and enforcing that social connection is keep to a routine as best as you can. Do an online course or class. So now that students have transitioned to more remote learning, some of our younger students within the K to 12, at least in Ontario here, there's certain time restrictions in which they're only given, 5 hours of work over the course of a week. Well, there's more than 5 hours in a day. So, even engaging our students or encouraging our students to engage in additional classes, whether it be art class, whether it be music class, or even an educational class, is going to help them stay connected with other individuals. Playing interactive video games. While, again, I'm not encouraging too much time in video games, right now, this is a huge opportunity that has already been available, that some of your students have already engaged in previously as more of a social activity that we can actually highlight as a means of them staying connected with other people. Looking at dress up and go diggy diggy dinners. So the diggy diggy, I have to put it into context, came from a family in Australia as to they got themselves all dolled up, makeup done, really nice wear, and they invited friends to have this dinner that they were dressed up at. So there's, again, new platforms, additional platforms that are accessible, Google Hangouts that you can also use as a means of connecting your students in a different social forum from a distance. There's other like meetup groups that, again, can be a way of them interacting with other internationals, whether it be international students across Canada or within your particular organization, and so forth. Just be cautious with regards to, house party apps and things of that nature to look at taking a bit extra measures of maintaining security if you are hosting something for your student population versus a larger community. Sources of comfort that we spoke of. Intentional self-care is important, and that's taking care of not only your mind, but also your body, being kind to yourself and practicing self-compassion. I've stressed a number of times with regards to maintaining a routine, taking time out for activities that you've enjoyed. So whether that be a good book or a comedy or playing a fun board game, which is something that you can also do, or just frankly making something, whether it be a recipe or a craft, encouraging the students to also engage in some of that activity. And they can actually have a video chat with regards to a large cooking class, as long as that's pre-prepared with regards to ingredients and things of that nature. We also have one of the handouts is the mental health self-care wheel, which does have different ideas that should be a good way of starting the conversation with individuals around self-care and the different types of self-care that they can do in order to keep themselves in a balanced state. Some simple tip to wrap up. First and foremost, during this particular time of disruption, it's really important for us all to really pay attention and know our own limits. This is an unprecedented time. We are faced with more uncertainty around what is to come versus our ability to sort of plan ahead. On a day-to-day basis, we're getting updates, and then there is a matter of a plan of action that our institutions, that even our own selves have to do with the information that we know. And when we have the expectation of wanting to know more and sort of striving to know more, we need to appreciate that not those sources of information are also in the same predicament in that they are trying to find out more as to better prepare us into next steps. So pay attention to our stress levels, pay attention to our coping mechanisms and how they are impacting us. One of the handouts is also the perfect anecdote, and that will provide you with various strategies and tips, not only on grounding techniques, but also how to flip the script in different perspectives of cognitive ways of thinking. And those are things that you can actually also share with your students with regards to simple tips and just better managing that thought process so you can have a bit more control over what emotions you have, but more importantly, how do you respond in your behaviors to those emotions and not become reactive. Spend time structuring your day, take care of your body, keep your mind stimulated. All of these particular aspects here can really help curb your emotions and really allow you to not necessarily feel as alone, because you do have the structure, you do have the routine, and part of that is filtering in those various remote socialization and social interaction activities that you can then also be a support system for others. Some resources that are available for support, I've sort of broken them up into two various buckets. We've got the free app supports that, again, can be given to your students and shared, or even for yourself, that work on various coping mechanisms, whether it be stress or anxiety management or even loneliness, as well as a body scan. And then I've also included some resources that are available through mental health and wellness support. So there are free online support groups, and I've included two there for you. There's local hotlines as well as distress centers that are available as support for mental health, and that is really connecting individuals with counselors and mental health professionals. There is the Kids Help Phone, as well as other provincial supports that are available 24/7. There's also the Keep Me Safe student support program that is available for eligible students. And when we say eligible, what that is we've got 24-hour-a-day support for students, either international or full campus, depending on the arrangements with the school. So if the schools have had the Keep Me Safe program prior to COVID-19, your students still have this support program regardless of where they are in the world. So we need to also encourage and endorse them to reach out for support when and where they need it the most. If you are not sure as to whether or not your school has this program, or you are in a position to where you'd like to advocate for this program to be brought into your school, I do strongly encourage you to send the email to inquiries@keepmesafe.org to find out more information and guidance around how to navigate that conversation.
A quick question, Christina, if you
Yeah.
don't mind. I've got a question here. Are these support groups and apps available or able to, can students access them internationally, as many of students have returned back to their home countries?
So I'll go back a screen just so we can see them. All of those apps that I've put out here are accessible regardless of where they are in the world. So I've made sure that that was the case. And with regards to the two free online support groups as well that I've identified here, will be accessible to students regardless of where they are in the world.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So with all this, some change is needed during this unique time. It is clear that, to us, that collectively the efforts of provinces, territories, countries, education associations and institutions, as well as each of us individually, can put us back on the path of moving forward and looking forward to new opportunities. So whatever our life's pursuits, I hope that your new perspective will help you win some victories for humanity in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. So with that, I've introduced you to one of my perspective shifts, and I've sort of captured in some words for you. So this is there's a difference between solitude and isolation. One is connected and one isn't. Solitude replenishes, isolation diminishes. Great things can come out of solitude. Growth requires patience, solitude, and sacrifice. You can't ignore growth calling. Growth will communicate through you by creating shifts in your life that will leave you with no other option but to adapt. Choose to rewrite the script. Choose to embark on a new journey and choose to embrace a new perspective. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I do invite you to email me if you are interested in any additional webinars that you might want to participate in or bring to your student population. With that said, any of the Keep Me Safe webinars that we have already hosted, there is a link to those previous recordings as well as up and coming mental health webinars through our website at www.garden.me. So I do encourage you to visit that website as well. And I do again thank you very much for allowing me into your home today and spending the time with me.
Great, Christina. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed that perspective shift. I really, yeah, that's very deep and moving and very thoughtful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and so now I'll be just showing my screen briefly just to tie up, just to wrap up the webinar. And so there are other professional development opportunities available through CBIE. And so you have the links there to our webinar archive as well as our CBIE events page. And there are a number of free resources on our COVID-19 dashboard. I did send the link in the chat, and so you should have that. And feel free, a lot of people are asking, can we share this? And so today's presentation, if you're using some of the slides, just make sure to reference Keep Me Safe by GuardMe and CBIE, and of course, Christina, if you want to jump in here, that these resources are there for you and for students and to help everyone during these challenging times.
Most definitely. Please do take the liberty in sharing the PDFs, whether it be the handouts on stress management or the wheel or even the presentations deck itself in the PDF that's been provided to you. Please do share it with whomever you feel is in need of that information. The whole purpose of putting this presentation together is to really highlight that we are all in this together. We are part of a solution. And part of our role may just be to share information and to model it. So whatever you feel that you need to do, you have my blessing.
Great, thank you so much. And so here's the link to the COVID dashboard as well. And there's a library of free resources and updates relevant to COVID-19. So if you haven't checked it out, we invite you to go there and to see it and to utilize any resources that might be useful for you or for your students. Now, thank you so much, Christina, for your really engaging, thoughtful, and presentation. We really appreciate you doing this today.
My pleasure.
And thank you to everyone who joined us. And, we were very active in the question box. We really appreciate your comments and your participation. And if we didn't get to your specific question, we apologize for that. But we will. But we did get through most of them. So that's great.
Great.
And so there will be, I've mentioned this numerous times in the chat, but the recording of this presentation will be sent to you later today, along with the link to the Google Drive. And so you can obviously share that widely, as we just mentioned. And there's also going to be a short survey available as soon as I close off the webinar, and also in the follow-up email. And this allows us to just get a little bit of data on how the webinar went for you. And if there's more importantly, if there's anything else that we can provide to you or that we can suss out and pull together to offer other webinars, or if you have some expertise that you would like to share with the community, then we can gather all that and we can follow up. And so thank you again, everyone, for participating. Take care, stay safe, and stay well. And until next time, if there's anything that you need, please feel free to contact learning@cbie.ca.
Thanks so much.
And that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone.
That's
Take
a wrap.
care. Bye-bye.